Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us today. My name is Heather Cogswell, and I'm a business consultant here at ADVIZOR Solutions. And today we're going to talk about the second of a series of webinars that have been set up to provide short monthly refresher courses at targeted topics that our customers have raised. So today we will be looking at global or local exclusions and how you decide when to use each of those exclusion methods. So before we get started, a couple of housekeeping notes. The first is that if you have a question, everybody is muted right now, so click the raise your hand button on the GoToMeeting session and we will unmute you so that you can ask your questions. The second housekeeping note is that you also are able to type in questions in the GoToMeeting panel. So if you have a question, type it in. We'll pick them up and answer them as we go through today's session. With that being said, let's jump into the topic for today, global or local exclusion. So for all of you dashboard users, you know that there's really two concepts to keep in mind as you're working through a dashboard and using a dashboard to answer specific questions. And those two concepts are the concept of selecting data and then the concept of excluding data. And so really those are the two things you need to know to use a dashboard to answer your questions. You select data, exclude data, and then keep selecting and excluding to get down to a subset of information. And a bit of a nuance that goes along with excluding data is that there's actually two ways to exclude data within an ADVIZOR dashboard. And the reason that we're focusing today's session on global versus local exclusions is because we found over months and years that concept is a really difficult one for users to initially grasp. So we want to just flesh out the differences between the two methods of exclusions and answer your questions so that we can clear this up. So for today, I've first put together a little mini example to get us talking about this topic, and then I'm going to jump into some demo dashboard examples that are more based around real life. So the example I'm going to be showing you today is based on a quick, informal, and probably very biased survey that I just conducted from some of my coworkers. So if you're a statistician, cover your ears because you're going to hate this. But I just surveyed the three people that were standing closest to me and asked them what they had had for lunch today. So we're going to be looking at some food data, and I think some of the answers that I received were wishful thinking and not really fact-based, so keep that in mind. But this is just a fun example to get us started, and then we'll jump into some real-life examples. So this first example is going to be laid out in PowerPoint slides, so I'm not going to be working within ADVIZOR at the beginning. These are PowerPoint slides. We'll jump into ADVIZOR as we move through this. So my mini example, we have two tables, a person table, which has 3 rows of data because I surveyed 3 people, and a foods table that has 12 rows of data because these 3 people have eaten 12 things combined. So let's talk about some of the data relationships within ADVIZOR, because when you're thinking about how you want to exclude data, the most important thing to think about is the data relationships that you're dealing with. So in our person table, I said we have 3 rows. We have 3 people that were surveyed, Doug, Heather, and Al, and each of those people has 1 row in the data. So Doug is here with his ID number, I have my ID number, and Al has his. So this is a one-to-one relationship because each person only has 1 row of data in this particular table. The second data relationship is what we consider to be a one-to-many. So here we have the same person table we just talked about, and then we also have this foods table. And you'll notice that the foods table is much bigger in terms of rows as compared to the person table. So I can see that in the foods table there are 2 columns, an ID column and a foods column. And it looks like Doug has consumed 4 foods today. Lobster, which may be more wishful thinking than fact, corn, potato salad, and jelly beans. So, his ID is listed next to these 4 foods. I have consumed sandwich, coffee, and jelly beans. And it looks like Al has consumed pizza, Sprite, jelly beans, salad, and lobster. So one quick side note, we do happen to have a huge jar of Jelly Belly jelly beans in our office, so that's why all three of us have consumed jelly beans today. So basically what you're seeing is this one-to-many relationship. We have a person table where each person only has one row, and then we have a foods table where each person could have one row or they could have hundreds of rows depending on how hungry they were today. And these two types of tables are very common in all projects that we work with. So you may think of this, the person table could be your entity table or your constituent table, and the foods table might be something like your gifts table, where one entity could have made one gift or they could have made 150 gifts. So these are the types of relationships that I'm talking about. So now that we understand the layout of these two tables and how this one-to-many relationship works, we want to now discuss how do we go about selecting and excluding data between these two tables. So within ADVIZOR, I mentioned that there's two ways to exclude data. The first way is to exclude data from the core table first. In our particular example, the core table is the people table. And in a lot of the projects that we do in higher education, the donor table or the constituent table or the entity table or the people and orgs table, all those types of tables are usually the core table. And within the core table, there's always that one-to-one relationship. So each person only has one row in the table. So that's the core table. And to exclude from the core table first, you would use the top toolbar on your dashboard to click the Exclude Unselected button. The second way of excluding data within ADVIZOR is from the local table first. And in this particular silly example, that's the foods table. The local table generally has that one-to-many relationship. Not always, but it's generally the case where the local table may have multiple records for each person. And so, in a typical example, the core table might be the people, and then you have a bunch of local tables, maybe degrees and sports and gifts and all kinds of things that relate back to the core table. But you still have that one-to-many relationship that we looked at with the people and the foods. And to exclude from the local table first, that's where you right-click on the chart that you want to exclude from and exclude first at that level. So we've kind of been talking about a couple of different key things to keep in mind before we move forward. We have the idea of selecting and excluding data within ADVIZOR, and we have the idea of, within tables, you may have a one-to-many relationship. And then we went a bit further and said, when you're selecting and excluding data, there's actually two ways to exclude data. You can either exclude from the core table first or from the local table first. And these two methods of excluding is where we find people get the most confused. So we're going to go through some examples that really break down how these exclusions work so that you can see the difference between them. And then we'll jump into some more scenarios and real-life examples. And again, if at any point you have questions, raise your hands in the GoToMeeting session, and we'll be sure to address those. So I'm going to focus in on the first method of exclusion that we've discussed, excluding from the core table first. And in my silly example, this is the people table. So let's bring up the two tables that we've been looking at. We have the person table, where each person has one row, and the foods table, where there can be multiple rows for each person. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select everyone who ate lobster. And again, this isn't ADVIZOR. This is a PowerPoint scenario to lay out the methods of excluding. So I've selected lobster. It looks like lobster appears in this foods table 2 times. So I've selected lobster. The rest of the foods are, gray or unselected. What does ADVIZOR do next? So since this foods table is linked to the person table, the selected rows of lobster go back and highlight the people that correspond to them. So this first row says that, ID number 1 consumed lobster. Well, ID number 1 highlights Doug. We then go down and see, ID number 3 also consumed lobster, while ID number 3 is Al. So these 2 selections link back to the person table and highlight the people who correspond to the foods selected. You'll notice that I did not consume any lobster today, so my record in the person table is gray and unselected. So now we have to think about how we want to exclude the unselected data. And for this first example, we're going to exclude from the core table first. What does that mean? I'm going to exclude all of the people from the person table who did not consume lobster, and then refresh to show the rest of the attributes. So pretending that this is an ADVIZOR dashboard page, I'm going to come up to the top and click on the Exclude Unselected button. And initially you'll see that I am removed from the table and excluded because I have not consumed lobster. I still have Doug and Al selected because they have consumed lobster. What ADVIZOR then does is refreshes the rest of the tables based on who is remaining in the person table. Again, this was a people-centric exclusion because we were working from the core table. So since Doug and Al still remain, and these two tables are linked, the tables are going to update to show all of the foods that both Doug and Al consume. So what you're getting is the two people who consume lobster and then all of the other attributes, or in this case, foods that they consume. So lobster and corn and potato salad and jelly beans come back for Doug. Pizza Sprite, jelly bean salad, and lobster come back for Al. And my 3 rows of data are excluded from the dashboard because my name has been excluded from the person table. So this is the first method of exclusion. We selected a food. That food selection updated the person table. We excluded from the core table, which is the person table, so we removed anyone who didn't have that food. And then the whole dashboard updated to show all of the characteristics for the people who did eat lobster. So you're getting that one-to-many back again. So that's the first example. I'll pause a moment and see if there are any questions before we jump into the second example. All right, I'll keep moving. If you think of questions, raise your hand or type in a question for us. So now, let's talk about the second way of excluding data. And this is excluding from the local table first. In this case, it's the foods table. So I'm going to bring back my 2 tables, the person table and the foods table. And I'm going to make the first initial selection. So I'm going to select everyone who has consumed lobster today. So again, that highlights 2 rows in the foods table. Doug and Al. And now, instead of excluding from the core table, I'm actually going to right-click on this chart and choose the Exclude Unselected option. Again, this is the way of excluding from the local table first by right-clicking on the chart. And you're going to notice that something very different happens. By excluding from the chart first, I initially dropped out all of the records that don't correspond to lobster. So I selected the 2 lobster records, and then I immediately removed all of the other types of foods consumed from the table. So now what's going to happen? Since the foods table is linked to the person table, these 2 rows are going to tag back to the person table and highlight the 2 people who consumed lobster. So ID 1 ties back to Doug, ID 3 ties back to Al. All of my records were removed because I didn't eat lobster, so I'm still unselected in gray. Then, since I have no records that tie back to me, I'm automatically excluded. And again, I've broken this down so you can see the steps. In a normal dashboard, when you exclude all of these foods, the person would automatically be excluded. But I wanted to lay out the steps of how this works. So now we're down to 2 people and their lobster records. I'm excluded. What ADVIZOR is going to do is then try to update the foods table from the remaining people, while all of the other records have already been removed. So we're only going to see the lobster record for Doug, and we're only going to see the lobster record for Al. So this is a very different way of excluding data. Basically, if you want to exclude from the local table first, it's the type of thinking of, I know that Doug has consumed a bunch of foods today, but I don't care what else he's eaten. I only care that he's eaten lobster, and I don't want to see those other foods. So you select lobster, exclude from the local table, and then drop the dashboard that way. So that's in a nutshell the difference between excluding from the core table first versus excluding from the local table first. When I excluded from the core table, I got back all of the food attributes for the people who were selected. When I excluded from the core table first, I dropped the dashboard to only the food attributes that I had selected for those people. So it's, not all of them, just the specific ones I had selected. So I'm going to pause for a second, see if there are any questions. And if not, we'll move into some real-life examples of this. All right, so let's keep going. Again, if you have anything that pops into your mind, don't hesitate to type it in. So I'm going to escape out of ADVIZOR, or escape out of PowerPoint and move into ADVIZOR. So this is one of our prospect identification demo dashboards. So we've got some disguised data here, but this is going to take those two concepts that we just walked through and put them into real-life practice. So what I'm looking at right now is an affiliation page on this dashboard. I've got my list of prospects over here on the right and their total lifetime giving, so I can see my highest prospects up here, and then it goes down to the lower ones. In total, I'm looking at 93,743 prospects. And then I've got their affiliations laid out over here on the left. So let's talk about using the different methods of exclusion within a real project. And one question that people often ask is that they may understand the difference between excluding from the core table versus excluding from the local table, but they just don't know when to use one versus the other. And when we build dashboards, we're very careful to label the y-axis. This actually is the y-axis, but the chart is flipped 90 degrees. When you have the one-to-one relationship, the y-axis of the chart is going to count the number of people or the number of constituents or the number of entities or whatever the term is that you use. And so if the count is of the number of people, then that's a clue that this is a one-to-one relationship because each person only has one record in this table. If you come across a table where the label on the y-axis is something other than number of people, so here it's number of affiliation records, on degree page it might be number of degrees, on giving history it might be number of gifts, all of those are instances where one person may have multiple records in the table, either because they have multiple affiliations, or they've received multiple degrees, or they've given tons of gifts. And so when you see a label that's not number of people, that's a clue that you need to think about where you want to exclude from. And then once you recognize that there may be a one-to-many relationship in your table, you have to decide what level of detail you actually want to see. So let's do a quick example here. Let's say I want to select all of my alumni. So I'm going to use my mouse to sweep over and select the alumni group. I see my count of prospects update. So I've selected 56,826 prospect alumni, and the list here has updated. Now I have to decide, how do I want to exclude all of this unselected data? I can exclude from the core table first, which is going to keep my alumni and potentially bring back other record types that they also fall into. So there may be some alumni here who are also applicants, who are also friends, who are also staff. So I can decide if I want to see that other level of detail. Or I can say, maybe these people are other affiliations, but for the purpose of this scenario, I don't actually care to see what they are. I only care that they're alumni. So I could exclude from the local table and just drop to their alumni affiliation type. So let's do this example both ways. So I've selected my alumni. I've got a count of 56,826. I'm going to come up to the top and exclude from the core table. When I do that, you'll notice that I keep my big alumni bar, but all of these other things also come back. And upon first glance, some people get confused by that, but if you think back to the lobster example, you can kind of go through your mind what has happened. We've selected the people who are alumni. There's 56,826 of them. We've excluded the people who are not alumni, but then we've refreshed to show all of the affiliations for the people who are alumni. So it's just like we selected lobster, got rid of the people who didn't eat lobster, and then showed all of the foods eaten by the people who did. So we've chosen to see a bunch of history here. The other way of excluding data is to first select alumni and then exclude from the local chart by right-clicking and excluding unselected. Here we're basically saying we know that these people have other affiliation types. We just don't care to see them right now. So we've dropped to just this single affiliation type. You'll notice that the count of people in both of these situations has stayed the same. I'm still at the 56,826 people who are alumni. The exclusion method doesn't change the number of people you've selected, just like selecting lobster didn't change Doug and Al. It just changes the number of affiliation records you choose to display. So we've selected everyone because they are alumni. We're just choosing whether or not we want to see their other affiliation types. So in both cases, I've got the same number of people. I'm just choosing whether or not I want to show more detail or less detail for those people. One question that just came up, when I hover my mouse over this alumni bar, the total count says 62,892. If you look at my prospect count down here, I've only got 56,826. So there's like 8,000 or so difference in records here. And that's a clue as an end user. If you see a difference in the count from a bar versus a count of prospects, that you are in fact dealing with a one-to-many relationship. So, and this looks like to me that some of these prospects have duplicate alumni record types. So they may have two alumni affiliations, which may mean something, or may be a data cleanup area where you can go through and find those people who have duplicates and say, no, but they should only have one affiliation of alumni. They may have other affiliations of parents and friends and faculty, but the counts are important to look at because you can quickly tell if you've got a one-to-one or a one-to-many, where one person could have multiple record types. So that was a simple example. I'm going to restore and reselect all my data. In the remaining few minutes, I'm going to go through just a couple other examples, reinforcing the difference between exclusion methods. So let's go to the degrees page. So we've got several components here. We've got the list of prospects and their total giving. We've got a count of the 93,743 prospects. And then we've got the year in which they received their degree, and then the actual degree name. So say, for example, I want to look at everyone who received an MBA in 2006. So again, this is disguised data, so it's older. So let's first focus in on MBAs and then look at those that were received in 2006. So how should we go about doing this? Probably the first thing you want to do is drill in on this degree chart and find all of the MBAs. So I'm going to zoom in and look for Master of Business Administration. So here we go. Here's my MBAs. Looks like I've got 9,642 of them. Let's select them. Again, I look at my chart axis, and it says number of degrees. This is a clue to me that I've potentially got a one-to-many relationship going on, where one prospect could have multiple degrees, be it undergrad and graduate, or multiple graduate degrees, or whatever the case may be. So I've selected my MBAs. I've dropped my list down to 9,614 prospects who have an MBA, and now I have to think about where do I want to exclude my data from. If I exclude from the core table first, I'm going to bring back everyone who has an MBA and all of their other degrees that they've received. And for this particular example, I want to look at MBAs that were received in 2006. So I don't really want to see their other degrees. I just want to know when they received their MBA. So instead of excluding from the core table, I'm going to exclude from the local table first by right-clicking and excluding unselected. What I'm saying is, I know that these people may have received other degrees, but I only care to see their MBA right now. So I'm excluding their other degrees and just focusing in on their MBA. So I'm down to 9,614 prospects. Again, the count here is 9,642, so it looks like there may be a couple people that have multiple MBAs listed in their records. You could look into that another time. And then I want to focus in on just MBAs that were received in 2006. So I come up to the degree year, select 2006, and my count has dropped to 58. Again, I could then exclude from the local table first and just drop the dashboard to this group of 58 prospects. So that's another example of dealing with this one-to-many relationship and deciding how you want to exclude data from. Before we end for today, I'm going to do one other quick example using the same degree page. Let me restore and reselect my data so I'm starting fresh. And I'm going to select my MBAs again and do the same scenario, excluding from the core table first so you can see the difference in results. So I've selected my MBAs. I'm going to exclude from the core table first. And what happens is exactly what I predicted. I got back all of these MBAs, but I also got back all of these other degree types because, MBAs have also received chartered market technicians and chartered financial consultants and bachelors of sciences and all of these other degrees. There's that one-to-many relationship that we anticipated. So one tricky thing to keep in mind when you're deciding where to exclude from, my initial scenario was looking at MBAs from the year 2006. So I've selected MBAs, excluded from the core table to drop to people who have an MBA and also show all of their other degree information. But then if I come up here to the top and select 2006, since I'm displaying all of the degree information for these MBAs, these degree years also correspond to all of the degree information for the MBAs. So since I excluded from the core table first, I haven't successfully dropped my dashboard down to just show MBA records. So if I now select 2006 and exclude unselected, well, I'm getting back, all of the people who have an MBA and another type of degree who received at least one of those degrees in 2006. So I haven't done a good job of focusing my question to just get the 2006 MBAs. So as you're working through those scenarios, it's important to think about the level of detail that you want to see. And in this particular example, you want to make sure that you exclude from the local table first, as we did in the first round of this scenario, so that you can be sure that you just drop to the MBAs in 2006 and not, other degrees received by MBAs in 2006. As you start practicing with this, we find that playing around with the dashboard and doing a little bit of trial and error and trying to answer the question by excluding both ways can really bring some insight into what you're looking to do. And just keep in mind that as you're working through scenarios, you can always restore and reselect your data and start over, or undo a step or two and try the exclusion a separate way. So we're just at the ending point for today. If there are any additional questions, be sure to type them in and we'll follow up with you. Or raise your hand and we can unmute you so that you can ask the question now. If not, I thank you for your time and attention and hope you have a good afternoon. And it looks like you guys are a quiet group. We don't have any questions, so we'll sign off for today. If you have any additional questions, feel free to get in touch with us and we'll be sure to answer them for you. Thank you very much.